Hi, everybody. Good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you're dialing in from. It's an absolute pleasure to spend the next 45 minutes with you, but also an even bigger pleasure to be here with Amanda. And I can't wait to hear Amanda go through the EU PPWR, which we will explain what that is, but it's all about packaging. My name is Geraldine Kosh. Lovely to meet you and hopefully see you again. I see some familiar names there in the attendee list. If you want to do me a favour and just check that the chat function is working, you can just say hello or hi in there. I'm going to share something in the chat, share a link for you, and it would also be nice just to hear that you're here. So please do ask any questions. As always, this session is being recorded and will be available, but it'd be great if you've got any questions. We will try and address them today. And if we don't, then if you leave your name, and at the end, we have a questionnaire that you could put your questions in as well. We will try and get back to you directly and address any questions that you have. Okay, so let's get started. Just to briefly introduce the ICW organisation. So I'm sure you've heard of them. They are a phenomenal team of experts that really help take the headache out of compliance. So as noted here on the slide, they were the pioneer in digitising testing, inspection and certification. So there are a number of tools available, and we'll show you briefly on the next slide. AI powered as well. There's a new tool that's come out, which I'm really excited to share with you, and I'll put some information in the chat. But what they really help with, they've got a team of over 60 people. They help with queries on testing, on inspections. Also, the system helps storing with your technical files and getting test requests as well. So on the next slide, we've got just a visualization of what that looks like in the QMAS tool. And you can see here, you get lots of information. So using data to your advantage. So getting all of that data in and understanding, well, where possibly are you not complying? Where are you spending all your funds in terms of testing? So it's a phenomenal tool. If you want to find out more, then do reach out to me or the ICW team. I'm going to very quickly put in the link while Amanda's talking, a new tool that's been launched by ICW that helps with risk. Those of you that know me will know that risk assessment is my favorite thing to do, which I know is sad. Based on injury data and also recall data. It's a really great tool. So I'll put in the chat a quick video that you can have a look about that. So, right. Nobody's put anything in the chat, but hopefully the chat function's working. Let me see. Oh, somebody said hello. Brilliant. So please do ask questions. We're not alone, Amanda. We have people there.
That's good. That's
Yeah,
good.
that's good. Right. Well, over to you.
Perfect. Thank you. Hello, everyone. So a little bit about me before we start. So I'm Regulatory Affairs Director at a company called Bloom Regulatory. I've been working in the cosmetic industry for over 25 years now. Extensive knowledge in cosmetic regulations, but also cover EU, UK food supplements. And another area of expertise that I have is forecasting regulatory changes and planning regulatory strategy. So really getting deeply involved in what's coming up, and that's my sort of trade association background coming through. Bloom Regulatory, a little bit about us. So we are a boutique London consultancy, just a small consultancy working primarily in cosmetics and food supplements and beauty accessories, but also, of course, all of these things have packaging, so into that space as well. So it is indeed the packaging that we're going to focus on today. And we're going to have a look at the EU packaging legislation landscape in the past and the present and what's coming up. We're going to have a quick look at what is packaging so that we're clear what we're actually talking about when we then talk about all the requirements of the new packaging and packaging waste regulation. And then, providing we've got some time left at the end, we're going to have a look at some of the innovations that are coming out in these sort of areas currently. Okay, so 1994 to 2026, we had the EU Packaging and Packaging Waste Directive. This directive was published with key objectives to reduce packaging, reduce waste from packaging, and to reduce hazardous substances into the environment and also exposed for consumers. So that meant that we have what we call the essential requirements, and they were threefold. So they were to reduce the packaging volume and weight to only the amount necessary, that packaging must be manufactured to allow reuse or recovery, so for example, recyclability, and that hazardous substances in packaging must be minimised. And specifically, we were looking at some heavy metals with limits that were put in place. Now, of course, 1994 is a long time ago now, so the directive is very old and very outdated. It is a directive as well, so what that means in the EU is that it has to be implemented in each member state individually. So that means a lot of different interpretations, some parts of it not implemented in some areas, whereas they were fully enforced in others. Because of the age of this legislation, of course, as well, member states have changed what they want to see in terms of packaging control. And one of the key things that we've been seeing is sorting labelling in some of the member states. And we're going to talk about that a bit more today as well. But we also, of course, not just because it's a directive, but what we can see across the EU anyway is enforcement has been incredibly unbalanced. So the concept of excessive packaging in some member states is a real problem. And then you take your product to another member state, you pop it on the shelf next to one that's twice the size with the same amount of product inside. And of course, it feels incredibly unfair, but that's the nature of some being relaxed about it and some being strict about it. And then, of course, there's been lots of changes since 1994. You know, that even the concepts of recyclability or using recycled content in plastics, it's a very different world that we're in now. So we can, with the new regulation, we're able to bring those concepts into requirements. So starting from 2026, we have Regulation 2025 number 40. And this is published as a regulation. So the key difference here, this time being a regulation rather than a directive, all of it applies in all member states. So we at least have some harmonisation and uniformity across the whole of the EU. Hopefully that will also mean that companies will be treated more equally by the authorities, but what I think we absolutely can expect with a new regulation, of course, is more focus on the content of it and more enforcement on aspects such as minimisation, which we haven't really seen too much of in the past. So let's pause for a moment and think about what might seem to be the obvious, but what actually are we talking about when we're talking about packaging? So before we talk about the controls, what are we talking about? So it is defined, and packaging means an item used for the containment, protection, handling, delivery, or presentation of products. Now, most of the things we're going to talk about today for packaging and packaging waste can apply to many different industries, but I'm coming from a cosmetic perspective. So all my examples here are based on cosmetics, but the principles apply no matter what product type you're talking about. So we're talking about primary containers, so the ones that hold the product itself. We'd be talking about boxes, where for cosmetics we may have an outer box as well. So you see our toothpaste here, we have the tube, but we also have the box. Of course, both parts are packaging. And then when we talk about things like mascaras, where we have the applicator that's actually attached and part of the lid, that becomes part of the packaging, an integrated part of the packaging. But also labels, ribbons, etc., anything that's part of that packaging that is containing, protecting, handling, delivering, or presenting the product. And that's also not just business to consumer, that's business to business as well. So all parts of the packaging. Additionally, we need to think about a bit wider as well. So of course, we've got the sales packaging that we just talked about, the packaging that the consumer is going to engage with. But then we've got grouped packaging, or what the regulation calls secondary packaging, which might be on the shelf. So if you've got a display pack where items are, you can see the example on the right-hand side of the slide here, where you've got items slotted into the box and the consumer takes one out and leaves the display packaging behind. That's within scope as well. And then we've got transport packaging, which we call tertiary packaging. So you can see on the right-hand side the example here, the pallet with the shrink wrap around the bottles of water. So all of that is within scope. Okay, so the packaging waste regulation then, our new controls for Europe. There are some key focus areas, and we're going to look at most of these today. So recyclability, packaging minimisation, single-use plastic, so some specific bans on some particular packaging items, labelling, minimum recycled content in plastics. We've got some requirements for substances, reuse targets, which we're not going to talk about today because I think we could probably put a whole webinar on reuse on its own. But then also extended producer responsibility, which again we'll just touch on briefly. So let's start off with packaging minimisation and talk about minimising material to start with. So I think the important thing to remember, of course, is this is not a new concept. This was one of the essential requirements under the previous directive, but there are more points to it now and it's going to be strengthened. So what are we talking about? We're talking about packaging that should not be excessive in size, should not be excessive in weight, or comprise of any unnecessary components. So it should be the amount necessary, and that term is used in the regulation, to ensure safety and hygiene and of course be acceptable to the consumer. So I've popped some examples on the right hand side. That's not to say that they are definitely going to be considered not minimised, but they are what I consider to be higher risk areas. So really think about things like double walls on, for example, the jar down the bottom. So we're more sort of in an area of deceptive packaging as well, because obviously there's a very small amount of product in a very large jar. But of course, do you really need to have that double wall? Does the packaging really need to be that size? And of course, it's glass in this instance, so it's very heavy too. What about inserts? Do you really need the insert? Do you need the size of insert? So maybe the one in the middle, what we're talking about when we talk about inserts. One which I don't have a picture there, particularly decorative components. Well, I was talking about things like ribbons earlier, might come under that particular category. Do you need them, or do you need them to the size that you have them? And then we do have one that is specifically mentioned actually and does have a requirement attached to it, which is to do with 50% empty space in e-commerce packaging. So I think we've all received that one at the top there where we've got a small package within a huge box. I think we've all been on the receiving end of those when they come delivered to our homes. So this is going to be controlled in the future. But what is good, I think, under the regulation is it's a balance across the full packaging. So if you have a product that has different parts to its packaging, yes, you need to consider that you need to minimise generally. But if you need to have something that perhaps is heavier or larger for a particular reason, but it's not the entire packaging, then you may be able to compensate perhaps through the rest of the packaging so that as a whole bundle, you are perhaps considered to be minimised. And then the other part to minimisation is not so much about the material, but about the substances in the material. So we must ensure that the packaging doesn't contain substances that will impact its recovery. So anything that's going to impact its ability to be recycled, or anything that's going to pollute the environment if it does have to become waste rather than be recycled. Okay, so this is a concept, bear with me one second, sorry, that was introduced under the EU Waste Framework Directive back in 2008. Now, I understand from the European Commission that the EU generates around 2.5 billion tonnes of waste per year, which is approximately 5 tonnes per person per year. So, of course, this creates significant waste management challenges. So, the Waste Framework Directive was introduced in 2008 to tackle these problems. and it is actually the directive that establishes some of the basic concepts relating to waste management. So, for example, definitions of waste, definitions of recycling and recovery, as well as introducing this waste hierarchy diagram. Now, what this does is it separates out the different types of waste that can be generated and puts which ones are most preferred through to the least preferred measures. So, for example, preventing there being any waste by reducing the waste generated is the most favourable. And we can think of the minimisation being under this category because what we're doing when we minimise our packaging is reducing the amount of waste by reducing the amount of packaging, of course. In the middle, we've got recycling, which of course is reusing and also therefore preventing waste, because we can think of waste is then at the bottom here, it's what goes to landfill. It's what we're not really reusing. It really is going just as a waste stream and is just perhaps only used once. Okay, so you've chosen your packaging. You feel like it's minimized to the degree that you can. Can you justify your choices? I think is really the main question. So, for example, these are some of the questions that you might want to ask yourself when you're choosing your packaging. So, is the overall amount of packaging needed? Now, perhaps you need to protect your product during transport. So, maybe you need a particular size of packaging to do that. Do you have any empty space in your packaging? With cosmetics, this is quite common because we fill a liquid into a bottle and there may be risk of explosion of the packaging if there isn't enough headspace at the top. So it may be perfectly valid that you haven't filled it directly to the top of the bottle. So yeah, that's another reason that perhaps you have larger packaging than perhaps appears to be necessary. What about the material that you've used in terms of modifying the volume? I think we often see now companies producing larger versions of particular items. I know often I see shampoos in 400s instead of 200s now, because obviously you are using more packaging when you do produce something larger, but you're not using as much as if you produce two small ones. So it's another way to consider, can you reduce the packaging through actually increasing your product size? And what about layers? Do you need all of the layers that you've got? A common one here might be shrink wrap. So on a cosmetic, you might already have your bottle, you might have your box, and then you put shrink wrap or cellophane over the top. Do you need it? Maybe you do, because maybe it's a safety issue if you haven't got that on there. But you need to be able to justify it as an extra layer of packaging. And then have you done any testing? Sometimes it's valid to do some testing. So if you perhaps have chosen a plastic bottle that's quite thick, it's quite robust, is that because you tried some thinner versions and they just broke on the filling line and you just couldn't work with it? All of that information is something that you can pull together to produce a minimisation dossier about your packaging so that you can justify all of your choices should you need to do so. And then, as I mentioned earlier, it is a balance across all of the packaging. So perhaps you've got one of them being particularly thick, the primary or the secondary, but you can balance that out with having the other the opposite way round. So this is just an example from the UK from quite some time ago now, back from 2013, where Unilever produced compressed air aerosols. So the one on the right versus the standard one on the left. Because 80% of UK consumers apparently prefer their deodorants in aerosol format. So of course they are quite large packaging. And Unilever found that by using compressed air, they could reduce the size by 50%. So the packaging was significantly smaller, yet it contained exactly the same amount of product. But of course, consumers didn't like this at all. So decisions are not always popular when you do minimise your packaging, and we're going to have a look at another one later as well. But of course, there are sometimes the opportunities to innovate and really have something new out there. Okay, next let's talk about substances of concern and minimising substances. So this is a wider topic in the EU than just packaging. The EU is implementing a number of regulations that are designed to reduce human and environmental exposure to harmful substances. And a key piece of legislation for that is the Eco Design for Sustainable Products Regulation, which defines substances of concern. And if we look at the diagram on the right-hand side, this tells us the 4 areas that are a substance of concern. So first of all, we're talking about substances of very high concern, SPHCs under EU REACH. We're talking about substances classified with specific hazard categories under the chemicals legislation. So things like CMRs, and then the new classifications of PBT, VP, VB, etc. We're talking about anything that's under scope of the persistent organic pollutants regulation, and then finally substances that negatively impact reuse or recycling, which as yet we're waiting for more information about, but obviously that at the moment is a general concept. So all of these things together come under the banner of what we call substances of concern. So what that means for packaging is there is a general requirement that substances of concern must be minimised. And then on top of that, we still have the heavy metal requirements that we had before for lead, cadmium, mercury, and chromium under the specified limit. Okay, next is the aspect of labelling. So this is anticipated to come in currently in 2028. As I mentioned before, there are a number of individual member states who have introduced their own labelling because they didn't want to wait, essentially. So at the moment, we have a situation where some member states have this requirement, but it's not harmonised. Each has their own, which of course then means it's difficult to fit on your packaging because you've got multiple icons. So we've got the 3 main ones here down the bottom. So you've got France, Italy, and Spain, and then you do also have Portugal, but you can put that one digitally. So at the moment, we've got quite different looking icons here, quite different processes behind it, and certainly nothing harmonised. So what the PPWR is aiming to do is to harmonise across the EU and to produce one icon on your packaging that would be able to satisfy all of the member states. And hopefully we would then lose all of these other individual ones in 2028 as well. So what that would be is sorting information and information about the packaging composition. So what I've given you there in the graphic, this was what came out under the consultation earlier this year. So you can see the examples that were being proposed. They are by no means the ones that are finally decided, so we wait to see what comes out. But you can see quite a large number there, and they do show you what type of material packaging is made out of. Obviously, a key challenge there is it's written in English on the one I've got here. So if we are in a situation where we need to put the words, we are still in a situation where we're going to need to put one of the languages underneath. So we're still needing quite a bit of space, but we'll see how this pans out, and hopefully we'll get the legislation published by August next year, if we are going to be required to do that by 2028. So we can update in time. Okay, next we have recycled content for plastic packaging. So the PPWR sets a minimum percentage that must be used in plastic packaging in the future, but it also specifies that it must be post-consumer recycled plastic. So it cannot be derived from industrial waste, it must come from consumer waste. Again, we're expecting guidance and regulation because we don't yet know how we're going to be required to verify the percentage that we have and how we're going to calculate what is there. Although we do at the moment think that that will be acceptable to be an average per manufacturing plant rather than every single item. So for example, if you've got a cap that for some reason has to be virgin plastic, but your bottle can be made out of recycled plastic, then as a whole, that is likely to be acceptable. So here's the deadlines, so things to keep in mind. Obviously 2025 now, but to introduce this across your full portfolio of packaging is obviously quite a large job when you're not just introducing it onto new developments. So time is ticking. PET plastic by 2030, 30%, other plastics 10% by 2030, and then we have a more strict deadline than in 2040 with higher amounts as well. Now, for cosmetics, this is a particular challenge because we are what's termed as sensitive packaging. Obviously, our products are exposed directly to human skin. And the PPWR requirements are expected to increase the demand for PCR materials at least 5-fold. So the challenges for the cosmetic industry are that there is going to be a shortage of high-grade PCR. Obviously, it's right that the food industry should have the first option to have the food grade materials, but often for cosmetics, we do currently use food grade plastic. So if we're going to have to use other grades of plastic, then there's going to need to be a lot of work behind that. And there are specific considerations that will have to happen, and that is largely doing a safety assessment for your packaging in a similar way to we currently do a safety assessment for the formula that goes inside. So identifying all of the impurities in the packaging, being able to characterize those in terms of their toxicology, then assuming that everything migrates, because we are likely to have to assume the worst case scenario at the moment. So effectively what we're doing is saying we're going to assume that all of the things that are in the packaging are actually in the cosmetic product. So what is the consumer going to be exposed to, how much of it, and is it safe? So yeah, it's quite an extensive process that we may have to do in the future to really have to consider that your product effectively now contains all of those things that your packaging contains. Okay, next, recyclability. Now I mentioned there is a definition of recyclability under the Waste Framework Directive, but in terms of the PPWR, the concept of recyclability is defined. So it does mean designed for recycling, it can be sorted and collected, and the resulting material can be used as a new raw material as well. Now, all of those 3 criteria will come in over time, but they don't all apply immediately. So from 2030, only packaging that is designed for recycling can be placed on the market. And in fact, I think that's grades A, B, and C from memory. By 2035, packaging must also be recyclable at scale and sorted. So what that means is essentially collected from home, from curbside. And then 2038, only packaging that is designed for grades A and B and also recycled at scale can be placed on the market. So we'll see those phasing in over time. But obviously, if you're doing a new development, it's good to keep those in mind early if you can. So the next one, extended producer responsibility, again, not new, won't go into this one in detail, but the general concept, of course, is that packaging producers pay the cost for waste management and the packaging that they put into the waste streams. So what we can expect under PPWR is firstly an increase in enforcement, because not all member states are currently enforcing that, a harmonisation of methods for fees across the EU, but also the good news is, of course, that the more recyclable materials that you put out there, then the more we should be seeing what's called eco-modulation criteria, so lower fees or no fees if it's not truly considered to be waste. Single-use plastic. This is the cosmetic example. So there is a list. So if you are from another industry other than cosmetics, do please check the list because there may be something that is going to be prohibited. For cosmetics, single-use plastic used for cosmetic, hygiene, and toiletry products for use in the accommodation sector. So, what we call hotel miniatures, colloquially, will be prohibited from January 2030. And then finally, after all of those requirements, which appear in between Articles 5 to 12, we then have a technical dossier and declaration of conformity. Now, obviously, if you're from cosmetics, you're familiar with a product information file. If you're from other industries, you may be familiar with having a declaration of conformity and a technical dossier. Well, now we need to have one for our packaging as well, exclusively for our packaging. So our declaration of conformity will need to declare compliance with Articles 5 to 12, so things like recyclability, contain the name and address of the responsible party, identify obviously the packaging this relates to, and also reference to the legislation and applicable standards. And then, of course, your technical dossier will be your supporting evidence that goes alongside that, which will contain things like your recyclability assessment, so your proof that you are recyclable, any test results you have. So, for example, if you're saying you comply with the heavy metals, then you show that you don't have any heavy metals, etc., etc. So the requirement comes in 2026 when the regulation comes in, but of course, as we're going to see again in a moment, a lot of these aspects don't come in as early as 2026. So of course, you can't declare conformity to things that you don't need to yet because you might not be compliant. So you'll need to keep updating this over the coming years as you bring in those new aspects. But generally speaking, the requirement for these is to keep it for 5 years for your packaging and update as necessary. So quick summary then of the key obligations that we've touched on today. So packaging minimisation, substances, labelling, recycled content, recyclability, prohibition of packaging types, and extended producer responsibility. So how does that look in terms of timing? So these are your key dates. Applicable from 2026, labelling 28, then quite a few coming in 2030, so recyclability, recycled content, minimisation aspects, e-commerce 50%, empty space, and your single-use plastic bans. And then we have the recycled at scale in 2035, and then the tighter controls on the quality of the recyclability in 2038, and then an increase in the recycled content percentage in 2040. So going back to our waste hierarchy then, so remember that, let's have a look quickly at a couple of things that are already out there in the world today that maybe we don't think of as coming in on our waste hierarchy. So I've taken maybe some non-cosmetic ones to be less controversial, so what I think is probably our main audience. Packaging free, obviously going packaging free is the ultimate in packaging waste prevention because there is no packaging. We see it a lot, perhaps on food, on fruit and veg, but for things like cosmetics, this may be a particular issue because there is a contamination risk. Of course, there is labelling required with a lot of product types. So where are you going to put that information if it's not on a piece of packaging? And this means that you do have limited product types where this may be appropriate to do. And I'm sure that's why we don't see all food like it either and just see certain types. Another example, refills. Again, packaging waste prevention, because often the refills are larger than the original size pack that perhaps you purchased. So you can keep refilling out of the one pouch refill at home. Of course, there are in-store options as well, but quite common now we see the at-home refills. Again, there are challenges for cosmetics, micro introduction by reusing the same packaging over and over. Long-term uses of the same pack. Also, if your plastic is not particularly thick, how many cycles of reuse can it handle before it cracks? And then, of course, labelling. Yes, you've got a label on your refill, and yes, you've got a label on your original. But what if you've got a best before date, for example, on something? If you're putting that into your refill container, do you need to put some labeling across or some way of handling those aspects so that you know the consumer knows when they need to throw that product away? Similar to the refill is the concentrated products. We see these quite commonly, we see in household products now. Advantage of packaging waste prevention again, because obviously we are producing fewer numbers over time. And there is less weight also for transport, so other benefits as well from an environmental perspective. But ultimately, it still becomes a refill at home model. So for a cosmetic, we've still got those same challenges of micro in particular. And obviously, with this one, you refill it with tap water, which is absolutely fine for a household product, but you can't do that with a cosmetic. So there are different challenges for cosmetics. Removing components altogether, again, packaging waste prevention. And I know this is one that just divides the room completely every time. Some people love it, some people hate it. I personally am not too keen because I find it really annoying, but I totally understand why supermarkets have got rid of the lid and they've just got the film on top now. Of course, they have got rid of what they consider to be an unnecessary component, but unless you eat the entire contents in one sitting, of course, you got to do something with it. So it becomes a little bit challenging for the consumer. Another one, removing components. This was something that we had happen in the UK, and I'm sure happens elsewhere too. But if you do have Easter eggs on sale, I'd said it's less controversial than the previous one, but maybe it's not because the whole topic of whether we should have huge boxes on Easter eggs is maybe controversial in itself. But back in 2012, one of our MPs produced a report on Easter egg packaging. And this in particular highlighted what used to be the plastic inside that held the egg in place and protected it. And of course, we've now seen that removed and replaced primarily with cardboard now. Although, of course, we still have the boxes because if you don't put a box on there, can you stop it from being crushed before it arrives to the consumer? And then recycled content. So this one, then we're looking at reusing materials. So we're still minimizing waste in a way because we have reused a previous material that was packaging. So what we tend to see at the moment is food producers going far beyond actually what's going to be required under PPWR. So obviously the Coca-Cola bottle made from 100% recycled food grade PET, and 80% on the Cadbury's wrapper there. So yeah, way beyond. And then finally, material changes. So we don't see this as much, and I must admit, I really struggled to find an example on this one. So this was the only one I could find, and I had to trust the Wikipedia entry. So apologies if it's not true. But I think the question here is there a benefit? I think some people say yes, some people say no. So we could have a whole discussion on whether it really is a benefit to change plastic to glass, plastic to aluminium, or glass back to plastic. This one apparently was a switch from plastic to glass, which was in order to make it more recyclable, and they also say more environmentally friendly. I'll leave that out there for you to decide whether that's the case or not. So key concept today then really is to recognise that of course PPWR isn't just about recyclability. Remember the waste hierarchy. It's a really good way to see how different measures can really have an impact on waste reduction. So of course, prevention of packaging ultimately is a reduction in waste, and minimizing your packaging will also be a reduction in waste. But remember that minimized packaging must still fulfill its function to contain and preserve, as well as ensure consumer safety. Okay, so that's me done. We've got a few minutes left, I think, if anyone's got any burning questions.
Thank you so much. As always, Amanda, I learned so much when I listened to you, and it got me quite emotional, sounds a bit dramatic there, but that hummus debate Whenever we get the hummus, it
I
really,
think maybe
really
that's what I just see in the chat that Tom's
gets on
popped
my
a,
nerves.
a
Yeah,
comment about being out in public. And I think, yeah, I guess that's about those kind of things. Yeah, absolutely. You have no option but throw it away, don't you? If you buy
it
something like that
frustrates
and
me.
you are
Yeah,
out.
yeah. Food waste frustrates me. So yeah, such an interesting debate. So I put it in the chat and see, someone saying they don't like it. Some people, like you said, creates food waste. Someone is saying, so yeah, really, really interesting. Thank you so, so much. I don't think there was any specific questions, but I did want to mention a few things. I think I was thinking about so much when you were talking, but I'm quite happy, especially the double the glass one you gave. And I remember buying a sun cream and I thought we had enough for the holiday and it was like 10 squirts and it was done. I was like, really? So I think from a consumer perspective, I think that's quite good. Obviously, if as long as it's, that they're safe and they're supposed to do it. So and claim substantiation. I was just interested. So 9462 EC has been around for a while. I felt the people that I worked with, and I mentioned it, they'd not really considered it and kind of forgot about it. But this seems to have a lot more requirements in it. And I just wanted to get your thoughts on that, especially the chemical. I'd say, don't forget you've got to test for the chemical requirements that are in there, and now they're still there. But I was interested on your thoughts on that.
I think it's going to be really challenging to use overseas packaging suppliers because there's going to be so much that you're going to need to know. And I think it's going to be so hard to get that information because I just
Yeah,
don't think the tests are going to exist. So I think that's going to be a huge challenge. I know we've already worked with some US businesses doing like an audit of what information they have. So not expecting them to comply yet because we don't know what some of the things actually involve in terms of compliance. But we've done some audits where we've taken, say, a sample of 5 products and we've looked at the information they have to find if they're actually getting the information that they would need. So they might still need to change their packaging before 2030, for example, but do they have the information from their suppliers to make those decisions? And we've certainly found with the ones outside of the EU, no one knows what anything is. No, no one's
yeah,
able to give that information. It's just completely alien to them. That's not to say that necessarily that's going to be better in the EU. I haven't seen that yet, so I don't know. Um, but yeah, it's really going to be really challenging, I think, to get on top of all of these things, on top of everything else that anyone's already having to do, obviously in terms of safety and compliance, to then work on all of this in such a short space of time.
yeah.
If you're a large business, in a way, it might even be worse because you've got so much more packaging to deal with. Yeah, really
Yeah.
challenging.
Yeah, it is. It is really tough. And I think so, the chemical requirements that were there before are still there now. I'm not sure about the limits on it, but you need to make sure that you test. And I think like most chemical or legislation that's coming out, it's about what's knowing in your product. And it's a good time now to do a little audit, exactly like you said, like have a little check and ask questions because you're going to have to make changes. I know there's a very in-depth question there. We'll have a look at that and come back to that because it's quite a lot. We've only got a couple of minutes, but I promise to get back to that person, and Amanda and I will review that question. And thank you so much for posting that. I wanted to ask one more. So you mentioned about the hotel miniatures. Is that the same? So when you go into a store and you see all the miniatures that they're selling in a store, or were you saying that it's just in the hotels? Or is that going to be all miniatures all around? Do you
That's a
know?
good point, whether you can still buy them for travel. I don't know off the top of
Yeah,
my head, actually.
yeah.
I
So,
think it's worded in a way that it means if it's in the hotel, but yeah, that's an interesting point that
oh,
we
okay.
can
And that's
double
something to
check
think
on
about.
that. Yeah.
I'm just thinking, traveling when I travel, I
Yeah,
would
because
love
the
it.
airports haven't changed the
Well,
liquids
and then some of
rules.
them have. I don't know if anyone's travelled recently. Coming out of Heathrow, where I come out of, they're allowing you to have more liquids, but then you arrive somewhere else and
Oh,
they're not.
really?
So they all need to have a
Yeah.
conversation with each other. But I would love it if I didn't have to, put all of my toiletries into a smaller thing. But yeah, anyway, we shall see what's going to happen. But thank you so, so much for your time. And thank you everyone for attending this session. The recording will be available. You've got Amanda's details there and the questions we'll have a look in the chat and we will get back to you. And please do provide your feedback with a questionnaire that's going to pop up in a moment. But thank you everybody and have a good rest of your day. Thanks, Amanda. Bye, everyone.
Welcome.